condolences pour in for the family of former President George Bush.
We've lost one of the great ones. You know, I think an era in politics has really ended today with his death.
George Bush, the happy family man, is now George Bush, Republican candidate for the United States Senate.
War hero, congressman, vice president, and 41st president. George Bush's life was rich, not only in public achievement, but also in private happiness.
George is different from other people, truthfully. You can't find fault with him because he's generous and loving and kind. I'm sorry I said that, but it's true.
A WGME special presentation, Remembering 41, President George H.W. Bush.
And with the Atlantic Ocean just in front of us and the Kennebunk River right behind us, good morning to you. I'm Greg Lagerquist.
And I'm Kim Block. Welcome to the CBS 13 special report. We have breaking news this morning. We are live from Kennebunkport, just around the corner from Walker's Point, remembering the life and legacy of former President George H.W. Bush.
Yeah, President Bush passed away overnight in Texas at the age of 94, just weeks after leaving his beloved Maine for what turns out to be the final time in his extraordinary life.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
When George Herbert Walker Bush took the oath of office in 1989, he already had an impressive legacy. World War II hero, Texas oil man, director of the CIA, and vice president. Politics would dominate his life. Bush was born in 1924 in Milton, Massachusetts. On his 18th birthday, he enlisted in the Navy, becoming the youngest fighter pilot in World War II. During an air raid in the Pacific, he was shot down, a rescue famously captured on film.
I knew that if something didn't pick me up, I would be captured.
Shortly after returning from the war, he married Barbara Pierce. They would have 6 children and 17 grandchildren.
I think he's the wisest, smartest, most decent, caring person I know.
Bush studied at Yale University. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa in just 2.5 years, but he left New England to make it on his own. He carved out his fortune in the wildcat oil fields of Texas.
What a day!
In the 60s, Bush turned to politics. He was elected to Congress in 1966 and became a power player in the Republican Party.
Leaving the door open.
In 1980, he ran unsuccessfully against Ronald Reagan for the GOP nomination, then agreed to be Reagan's running mate. He was Reagan's vice president for 8 years before becoming the 41st president of the United States.
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
During his one term in the White House, Bush played a key role in the reunification of Germany. He also took on Saddam Hussein for invading Kuwait, launching Operation Desert Storm, the first Gulf War.
A new world order can emerge, a new era.
Bush formed a coalition of 30 nations to liberate Kuwait in just 6 weeks, but he was criticized for not removing Iraq's defiant leader. After the war, the economy slowed down.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Bush was forced to break that campaign promise and raise taxes. As the economy continued to sink, so did his approval ratings, and in 1992, he lost the election to Bill Clinton. In later years, the former rivals raised millions for victims of the tsunami in Southeast Asia and Hurricane Katrina. Bush remained active during retirement. He saw his oldest son become president, and another one, Jeb Bush, served 2 terms as Florida's governor. He even went skydiving to celebrate his 80th, 85th, and 90th birthdays.
Can't play golf anymore, but I still can jump out of a plane.
But in his final years, Bush's health deteriorated, and he developed a form of Parkinson's that made it difficult to walk. He used a wheelchair during a 2011 visit to the White House, when President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In 2018, Bush was at his wife's side, holding her hand when she passed at their Houston home. He called her the most beloved woman in the world, his devotion to her to the end never failing.
Meantime, here in Kennebunkport, many people are just waking up to the breaking news that one of their favorite longtime summer residents has died.
But the sadness being felt here in this coastal town is really being shared all around Maine, a state President Bush considered his second home.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
Mainers watched with pride on January 20th, 1989, when George Herbert Walker Bush took the presidential oath of office. To most people, he will be remembered as our 41st Commander-in-Chief, but Mainers will remember him as someone who loved our state as much as anyone could.
It means a lot because I'm 88. I've been here part of every year except one when I was overseas in the Navy for part of it, and so it means a lot to me.
This was President Bush at the premiere of an HBO documentary about his life. It's here at his family home on Walker's Point that Bush began his love affair with Maine, and it was the first place he came home to a few weeks after the inauguration. We caught up with him and the First Lady on a familiar stroll down Shore Road.
You guys see the lobsters in there? No. I gotta get him to let him take a picture.
Although the entourage was new, the friends were old, and the president even took the time to reference one of our former reporters, Dave Silverbrand.
Oh, how's David? Give him my best.
Over his 4 years in office, the Secret Service and the national media got familiar with the president's favorite pastimes in Maine. If he wasn't on the golf course, he was probably headed off fishing.
After the mackerel are running out to sea. They are.
The president was always at home on the water and on board his powerboat Fidelity.
And now I'm privileged to have a very fast boat, a very powerful boat. Everyone wants to go on it. It's a wonderful, wonderful outlet for me.
But it wasn't all recreation at Walker's Point. During his presidential term, Bush used his summer home as a backdrop for world diplomacy. He talked about that with me in 2007 when Russian President Vladimir Putin was headed to Kennebunkport for a meeting with Bush's son, then President George W. Bush.
As for the future,
We've had a lot of experiences with world leaders that I think have been conducted in a very favorable environment. And so we did a lot of work here, but also everyone that came here, whether they agreed with us or not on an issue, felt could understand why I wanted to do what we did here.
You can't talk about the former president without talking about the woman he married in 1945, Barbara Bush. Who can forget their radiance on Inauguration Night, or his pride as he toured the children's hospital named after her at Maine Medical Center? Family was everything to President Bush, all the more apparent when he became the father of a president.
Somebody said to me, does it hurt more when they used to criticize you, which they did incessantly in 1992, or more when they criticize your son? It's not even a close call. Much more when they criticize your son.
George Herbert Walker Bush lived a large life, challenging and enjoying himself to the end. Whether jumping from airplanes at age 85 and then again from a helicopter at age 90, or soaking in the standing ovation at a Best of Broadway show for the Barbara Bush Children's Hospital. In recent years, he struggled with health issues, including a form of Parkinson's disease. Respiratory problems put him in the hospital in Houston more than once. After one long stretch, he surprised everyone by bouncing back to toss a coin, the coin, at the Super Bowl, featuring the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons at NRG Stadium in Houston. It was one of the president's last public appearances with his wife Barbara, capping off a large and meaningful life enriched by the peace and comfort of decades of Maine summers at Walker's Point.
And it'll stay in this family. There won't be any Motel 6 out here.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, that's true.
The country has lost a historic leader. Maine has lost a friend. And Walker's Point, which is just down the road here on Ocean Avenue in Kennebunkport, is the summer home of the Bush family, and it is certainly one of the most prominent and best-known houses in Maine.
It absolutely is, and as we just heard, during his presidency, it served as a summer White House and definitely played a role in his foreign policy.
My grandfather built this house here in 1901. His father built a house about the size of that one the same year. And my aunt, maiden aunt, lived in one little house right there. So it's family for us.
President George Herbert Walker Bush spent much of his childhood at his family's Kennebunkport estate. He and his wife Barbara would later spend summers with their 6 children. But when Bush became vice president and then president of the United States, it put Walker's Point and Kennebunkport on the map attracting leaders from around the world. In 1989, President Bush applied his face-to-face diplomacy with French President Francois Mitterrand at Walker's Point. A year later, with the president needing allies for the first Gulf War, the investment paid off.
And later, when we wanted to have France on board in Desert Storm, I know that helped. He had more trust if you know somebody.
With war on the horizon, President Bush spent many working weekends at Walker's Point with other heads of state. In 1990, King Hussein of Jordan visited the summer White House, as would leaders of Israel, Canada, the United Kingdom, and others.
Remember when King Hussein flew in here just before Desert Storm. And as soon as his helicopter took off, in came the Saudis to talk about the other side of the possibilities of the Desert Storm. And so we did a lot of work here.
Walker's Point continued to host world leaders under the presidency of his son, George W. Bush, including the leaders of Afghanistan and Kazakhstan, who both visited the elder President Bush at Walker's Point less than a week apart. And the following summer, 2007, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with both presidents 41 and 43 at the Kennebunkport compound, further cementing the seaside estate's place in history, a place of power and beauty.
Well, we hope we haven't inconvenienced our neighbors. That worries me a little bit, but I don't think we have, and I think we have, because of my former job and our son's job, I think it has attracted a certain notoriety to Kennebunkport, but we don't want to be a part of changing the down-to-earth nature of Kennebunkport living.
Now, in earlier years, with no world leaders in sight, George and Barbara used to walk along Ocean Avenue over here, past the Colony Hotel and along the Kennebunk River, and oftentimes would just chat with people they met along the way.
They were a familiar sight in downtown Kennebunkport, and that's where we find CBS 13's Taylor Cairns. Taylor?
Yeah, hey guys, it's definitely a somber morning here in the Kennebunkport area as people wake up to the news of George H.W. Bush's passing. But some people have already made his mark downtown, and that's because right behind me in the center of the town square, you see that the flag has already been lowered to half staff.
He and Barbara Bush, of course, made presidential history. They had the longest marriage in presidential history, married for more than 73 years.
And as you know, Barbara Bush passed away just this past April at the age of 92. Jana Brunello takes a look back at their remarkable love story, which began decades ago.
You can't tell the story of George Herbert Walker Bush without Barbara.
I fell in love with him practically at first sight.
Their love story began at a dance in Greenwich, Connecticut. George was 17, Barbara 16. They were engaged when George left to serve in World War II. He named each of his planes Barbara, and the two kept in touch through letters. George wrote this one on December 12, 1943, about his excitement over seeing their engagement announcement in the paper. I love you, precious, with all my heart, and to know you love me means my life. How often I have thought of the immeasurable joy that will be ours someday. How lucky our children will be to have a mother like you.
They're an amazing couple. Amazing couple. A life of service, a life well led. Both of them.
Their love proven on paper. The original protected at the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum in College Station, Texas. The museum also holds Barbara Bush's wedding dress. The couple married on January 6, 1945, 2 weeks after George returned from the war. It started a 73-year marriage, the longest presidential marriage in history.
One of the reasons I made the most important decision of my life to marry George Bush is because he made me laugh.
Poppy and Bar laughed with each other until the end, in sickness and in health. He was by her side when she passed in April 2018, holding her hand as she left this life.
The last time my mom went into the hospital, I think Dad got sick on purpose so that he could be with her. That's my theory, at least. Because literally a day later, he showed up with an illness. He came into her room when she was sleeping and held her hand. His hair was standing straight up. He had on a mask to improve his breathing. He was wearing a hospital gown. In other words, he looked like hell. Mom opened her eyes and said, "My God, George, you are devastatingly handsome."
When Barbara died, George said he wanted to stay strong for his beloved wife and their family. 41 told us to cross the Bushes off your worry list. Now that George and Barbara are together again, we finally can.
During the summer months when they were here in Maine, the Bushes could often be seen at Sunday Mass at St. Anne's Church right around the corner from us here and at many other places throughout town.
As CBS 13's Jennifer Long explains, the President and First Lady made it a point to really be active members of their community and left their mark on this town that many people call home.
It's the soundtrack of summer. Evening strolls in Duck Square and dinner by the Kennebunk River. It's easy to see why one might fall in love with this scenic seaside town. If stories and pictures tell true, that's exactly what happened to our 41st president.
They've left a remarkable history here.
Kirsten Camp has cataloged H.W.'s long life and legacy in Maine at the Kennebunkport Historical Society.
When President George H.W. Bush was president, he would invite people to come onto Air Force One, go into the White House, Marine One, and oftentimes as a token, he would give cufflinks or tie pins, and we have that on display here today.
Presidential pins, tickets to the inaugural ball, a rare replica of Walker's Point. They all tell the tale of a president living and working in vacation land. But that's just part of the story.
He has been an active member of the community. He didn't need to do that. He could have easily have fallen into the shadows and lived a very private life. But he hasn't. He's moved amongst us. He's impacted our lives.
It's an impact that continues even now and heard all around town.
They're all fun. I mean, if you see, this is at Walker's Point.
Bonnie Clement remembers one of President Bush's first visits to her general store, HB Provisions, a visit that turned into a ride on Fidelity.
He was getting a coffee and a donut. He loves our donuts, and he said, "What are you doing this afternoon?" And I said, well, I don't know. Helen and I were like, we're kind of working. And he said, want to go out on the boat? And we're like, sure, we'll go out on the boat.
What followed? 15 years of friendship filled with golfing, trips to the White House in Houston, her wedding near Walker's Point. Clement says she'll remember H.W.'s humor, captured in every single photograph on the wall.
He'll always say something that is hysterical. And that's why most every picture, everybody, and he does, he makes you feel relaxed. And he just says things that are so endearing and just funny.
They've been coming here for years.
The presidential presence could also be found at Mabel's Lobster Claw. David Mulver is a server and remembers warmth from the man who loved his swordfish.
I know one night when I was here, he got up and went to every table and just said hello after he'd eaten, and then they gave him a standing ovation. And he's just as personable as you could imagine. I mean, he's a great guy.
Sonny Hutchins says Bush would get swordfish at Port Lobster too. He developed a relationship with 41 through golf and remembers him as any old Mainer.
They'd walk up the street, you'd holler and wave, and that was it. And you didn't call on him for an autograph or anything. I had a standing rule. He didn't ask for my autograph, and I didn't ask for his. That was the standing rule. And it worked out well.
Camp says these Bush stories are abundant, an oral history of a presidential mark on Kennebunkport.
These people, they have a genuine connection to President Bush, and I get to hear those stories all the time.
Her own Bush story revolves around her son, at the time a second-grade student writing a president on President's Day.
And sure enough, my little guy got a letter back from President Bush answering every question very specifically. He sent him books on the White House and on the Secret Service and had it delivered to his second-grade classroom. Now, this little man is so excited to be president one day. He has learned that this great man took the time to write to a second grader, and it really did change his life.
Kennebunkport is forever changed after falling for a president who loved back with all his heart. something surely will be missing in its summers.
Coming up, how President Bush made public service
1,000 points of light.
a pillar of his presidency and helped create the world's largest organization dedicated to the cause.
He was honest, thoughtful, civil, had strong differences with people. He was a proud Republican, had a tough race with Mike Dukakis in 1988, Bill Clinton in 1992, but he's a class guy. And he listened to people, and he really believed in the ideals of America. With George H.W., we've lost a real gentleman, a class guy, and a true American patriot.
Good morning from the Cape Arundel Golf Club, one of President Bush's favorite places he used to visit here in Maine. If you take a look at the clubhouse behind us, that's actually called the 41 House that was created back in 2011 to honor him. And as Dave Eade reports, the Bush family connection to the love of the game of golf spreads back for generations.
Even after he could no longer play, George Herbert Walker Bush loved coming here to Cape Arundel Golf Club, just a few miles from his home at Walker's Point.
He's been extremely involved in golf basically his whole career, and he's actually a former club champion here at Cape Arundel.
In fact, the clubhouse is named for him, 41 House, for the 41st president. Inside is filled with presidential memorabilia, like his presidential golf bag and photos, lots of photos of celebrities and golf pros visiting Maine to play around, like Phil Mickelson and Arnold Palmer. And in many of the photos is 41's good friend, Cape Arundel golf pro Ken Rayner.
It's cherished moments, but the best part about it is cherished moments for him and all of us that go with him. Multiple hours on the golf course with just some amazing people. But it all comes down to the same thing, value of quality of life and sharing it, and he's an expert at it.
The Bush family's connection to golf goes back generations. This trophy, showing the club's champions here from the 30s and 40s, has both his father, Prescott Bush, and his grandfather and namesake, George Herbert Walker, both of them former presidents of the United States Golf Association. And it was Walker who founded the Walker's Cup, a competition between the top amateur golfers in the U.S. versus Ireland and Great Britain that's still played to this day. And his grandson would keep playing while he was president and long after. A way to focus, compete, and Rayner says, enjoy life and those around him.
Trying to live life to the fullest for that very bit of a moment, and he did it countless times.
Thank you all.
He also turned his love of golf into something more, hosting the annual Gary's House tournament starting in 2003, enlisting friends and celebrities from politics, entertainment, and sports.
So many volunteers willing to help and so many donors willing to help by playing in this tournament. So it means a lot to me.
This is a great slice of Americana. See people gathered around all for the same purpose and cause.
It's a cause still going to this day and still drawing celebrities like Maine native and actor Patrick Dempsey.
There's so much love for him in this community, and understandably so. They give back.
As for the game itself, Rayner says George H.W. Bush took the golf seriously, but not himself.
He always hit first. We used to give him a hard time about that, And of course, as we all know, there's only 34 rules in golf. And his 35th rule would be the no laughing rule. And you can't laugh at his first swing in case he doesn't hit it well.
And we heard about the 35th rule when former President Bill Clinton visited in 2005, a guest at Walker's Point after they worked together on the tsunami relief project.
It's called the no laughing rule on the first tee. Okay. See something that brings a laugh, contain it.
George says that it's on the first tee hit till you're happy. After that, no mulligans.
I've loved it. It's meant a lot to me, and I can't thank them enough. And I had a marvelous time here last night.
You can feel strongly about your principles, and we do. We differ on a lot of issues, but That's not what the tsunami relief was about, and that's not what life ought to be about.
And in later years, when 41's playing days were done, he would still come to the golf course, not to compete, but to show he cared for his charities and for his friends, because in his view, that's what life ought to be about.
I think the idea of service is being honorable. It's an honorable profession, and giving back is honorable, and it's the American way, and it makes us all have a better quality of life, and he's lived that.
And as we continue our live breaking news coverage here in Kennebunkport, everyone knows that the Bushes had a summer home here in Kennebunkport. But for a brief time, they also had ties to Lewiston, Auburn.
Yes, and as Marissa Bonner reports, we got a glimpse of that time thanks to some rare video footage of George and Barbara from the 1940s.
Barbara Bush
and Poppy Bush, Yale.
A young George H.W. and Barbara Bush, seen in a 1948 promotion for Bates Manufacturing, as the textile company tried to improve college dorm rooms.
The surroundings are lovely, but in all too many cases, the rooms they move into look pretty much like a barracks.
This footage was found in the basement of one of the Bates Mill buildings in 2007. Now it's kept at Museum LA.
We were pretty excited about it.
Executive Director Rachel DeGrosier says they called the Presidential Library in Texas right away.
Then the very next day they called us back and they said, we've been looking and we have nothing in film at that age for them.
The August 1st issue of Vogue and the September Harper's Bazaar are going to feature Bates Victoria bedspread.
The video highlights consumer polls on items like curtains and furniture.
Here, Poppy and Barbara Bush, married couple from Yale, use it for their combination living room bedroom that's right for entertaining, right for living.
But it also gives a glimpse of the couple early on in their marriage.
We were so excited because it made a huge connection with what we were doing in the Saving the History of Lewiston, Auburn. And President Bush actually was stationed and lived here for a while.
The footage will remain part of the museum's archives and history. In Lewiston, Marissa Bodner, CBS 13 News.
And as we close out our coverage here in Kennebunkport, we are reminded of the former president's zest for life. His birthday fell during the summer, and he loved spending it in Maine.
He absolutely did. He knew how to celebrate, too. Boating, fishing, and, of course, skydiving in later years. I wanted to share some of those famous jumps and his spirit of adventure.
There he was, 90 years young. More than a mile up in a helicopter, ready once again to jump. The announcement had come just hours earlier, and word spread fast.
Oh, I'm so excited. It is an absolute pleasure to see this happen.
I think it is a wonderful tribute to what a man who is 90 years old and a true American hero is capable of doing at on his 90th birthday.
I feel wonderful.
The former World War II pilot had done this before, of course, joining veteran members of the military's Golden Knights for his 80th and 85th birthdays, with a lot of fanfare and well wishes on those occasions, including from another President Bush.
I thought it was awesome. It was awesome.
But in the last couple of years, the elder President Bush had been slowing down a bit, often needing a wheelchair to get around. The thought that year, he wouldn't jump at 90. But he did. His 8th ever parachute jump. Once again in tandem with a Golden Knight above the coast of Kennebunkport, he spiraled down near the family compound to St. Anne's Church, coming in low and fast at the landing, almost perfectly hitting the X, although with a drag along the ground and an anxious moment as they came to a stop. But within moments, it was clear he was fine. Kept back this time. From above, we saw the unmistakable white hair of Mrs. Bush, leaning in to give him a kiss, or maybe a gentle scolding. Then off he went in his wheelchair to celebrate the rest of his birthday. Perhaps this former president could no longer easily walk, but he showed us that day he could still fly.
Soaring legacy, to be sure.
Our coverage will continue on air and online. Live in Kennebunkport, for Greg Lagerquist, I'm Kim Block reporting.